I would now like to introduce Matt Jones, one of the world's foremost authorities on brand experience, to talk to us about establishing, evolving and enhancing a successful brand. Matt is a leading strategist and storyteller when it comes to the intersections of brand, business, leadership, experience, culture, technology and human behaviour. In December 2013, he was one of 3 founders to launch 4 Pillars Gin, which quickly went on to be the #1 selling craft spirit in Australia. 4 Pillars Gin is an overnight small business success, 5 years in the making. Matt is the brand brains behind 4 Pillars, connecting the dots between brand and purpose theory and gritty business delivery. Please join me in welcoming Matt Jones.
Thank you, guys. Good afternoon. I feel I'm competing both with an amazing view behind me and an amazing lunch that you guys are enjoying. So thank you so much for having me. As you heard, I'm one of 3 co-founders of 4 Pillars Gin. I'm the brand guy. Stuart is the drinker, and then Cameron is the maker. He's the guy who's out doing all the hard work. And for 5 years and 2 months, we have trusted in this idea of craft. And I'm going to jump down so I can walk around a bit, so wave if you can't see or hear me. But I'm going to talk about this notion that it is trusting in our craft. It's trusting in the source of truly differentiating expertise that's kind of got us where we've got so far. And as you've heard, we're 5 years and 2 months old. I think we're entering the second phase of 4 Pillars. This is a real-time conversation. This isn't one of those business case studies of something that happened 10 years ago. This is happening now. So if I feel like this is therapy at times, it may well be because it's therapy. One of the things I want to touch on today that our craft has helped us guide are building trust with our customers and making the right decisions. And whenever I walk into a room, whether it's with a financial industry group or a real estate industry group, I think those are 2 really common themes. How do I build a differentiating sense of trust amongst my customers, my clients? And how do I make the right decisions in terms of where to spend my budget, my time, my focus? Because we don't have much of it. And there are 1,001 options and opinions in our faces every day. So I want to talk today about how to maybe work on those 2 things. In terms of what you guys can learn from a gin business, or maybe it's some of that, I think we're all navigating the same cultural landscape. We were chatting about it at my table. This is a very, very different world. I was in a meeting with the guys from Dan Murphy's the other day and reflecting on how much younger people are getting into really premium gins. You know, I was thinking about what I was drinking when I was 23. It wasn't super premium craft gin. I didn't really care what it was. Today, there's a very different consumer. Is that relating to their aspirations in the real estate market? Are people giving up on buying an apartment sooner and then thinking, you know what, I'll spend it on a great experience now? When people are moving into that first home, how important is home entertainment and quality consumption and all of those things? We're all looking at different angles on the same culture that's shifting, the same landscape that's shifting. So maybe you can take that. But the other thing that I want to reflect on that I think we share is this balance between the importance of sales and the importance of brand. We're all inhabiting worlds where results count, where sales results are the only things. And the easiest thing to stop focusing on in that landscape is brand. This intangible, ephemeral thing that you can't touch, you can't really measure. There are people who try and measure it, but I don't really believe you can. And yet you all instinctively know if you don't invest in it for enough time, your sales will start to lag. You'll start to see the impact. So how do you get that balance right between that short-term return of sales, that long-term return of brand? So we're going to talk a bit about what are brands, why do they matter, how brands get built. We're going to talk a bit about how you build a brand that's truly distinctive, differentiating, and critically drives behavior. There is no point you investing in a brand that doesn't affect the customer behavior you want to affect. And really critically, I want to reflect a bit on how customers are changing, how this landscape that we're all inhabiting, we're all navigating is changing. And last thing, and critical thing, not so much how you need to act, but how you need to think, or at least how I think you might think to create some clarity. And the first thing, I've mentioned it already, is craft. You probably don't call it your craft, but I guarantee that everyone in this room, in their business, in their career, has something that really stands out. Something that is your source of true expertise, the stuff that you can do differently or better than anyone else. I would call that your craft. I think that's worth really investing in. Around that, the stuff that's really served us well at Four Pillars has been a great sense on focus on purpose. Why do we exist? Why do we matter? We'll have a chat about that. We've also really focused on the importance of experiences. And we'll talk a lot about why in this noisy world, this attention deficit world, it's turning your craft into an experience that people can touch and feel and talk about is so important. And lastly, the ability to use those experiences to build community. The way that social media has been a game changer in our ability to have direct relationships with our customers and build really quality conversation-based communities with them. So those are 4 things I'm going to touch on. I'm really, really happy, by the way, to share these slides with the guys at Real Estate View. If anyone finds any use in these, if you think, well, there are half a dozen slides in between that guy talking too fast that I wouldn't mind showing my team, then really, really happy for you guys to get those. But let's start by talking about brand. The critical thing for me is brands do not exist. There is no such thing as your brand. And you might say, well, wait a minute, what's that? And I'd say that is a brand mark. That is a visual that makes you think of a brand. But the brand of Nike, the brand of Apple, is what you thought about and what you felt when you saw that mark. Brands live in feelings. They live in emotional responses. They live in instincts. That's the first thing you need to understand, that brands don't exist, but everyone has an instinctive reaction to the name of your business, to your category, to you yourself. That's the brand, what they think, what they feel. So another way of thinking about it, and to use a sort of behavioral economic perspective, brand is simply bias. And this is really, really important. We are all, because we are human beings, we are all deeply biased. Behavioral economists call these things heuristics. They're the shortcuts we use to navigate the world. Without these heuristics, without these shortcuts, without these biases, we'd sort of fall over because we'd spend every 5 seconds thinking, should I breathe? Should I stay vertical? You'd question everything. So we don't. We sort of go on autopilot, and that helps us save the very limited amount of processing power we have up here for the decisions we need to make. So we all navigate the world with incredible bias. So one of my biases is I drink coffee every morning. That makes me unexceptional. When I'm in Sydney, I drink a flat white, a strong flat white, and then a piccolo, and then a third piccolo. When I'm flying to Melbourne or waking up in Melbourne, I drink a latte. I am aware they're the same drink. I'm really conscious of the fact I've got a double shot of espresso and some frothed milk there, but somehow in Melbourne it feels right to drink a latte. That's a bias. There's nothing particularly rational about it, nor is there anything particularly rational about the fact that I always wear Onitsuka Tiger trainers. Now, these are trainers I've been wearing for about 5 years. I've got about 40 different pairs. They're not waterproof, so I've got one pair of R.M. Williams. If it had been raining today, I couldn't have put that slide up, but on a dry day, I can put that slide up. And these trainers were made by the company that went on to become ASICS. It's a Japanese trainer brand, and I could tell you that my loyalty to Onitsuka Tigers is about that, the heritage of the brand, the fact that the guy who started importing them from Japan to America made so much money, he went on to found Nike. I could tell you it's the Mexico 66 design, and it's an iconic thing. But the reality is I don't really care. I've just researched that to justify my bias. The reality is it's just a habit I've got into. It's one less decision I have to make. Every time my sneakers are wearing out, I don't have to go to shops and go, do I want a pair of Adidas, Nike? I just go and I buy the same pair of sneakers. It's just become my behavior. It's the same way that I hate Bing. I think Bing is a disgrace of a search engine. I think the companies that force their staff to use Windows and default to Bing are sort of intolerably cruel and sadistic. But I haven't used Bing for 5 years. I mean, Bing might be awesome. I don't know. I don't care. I mean, I do know that when I Googled Bing to get to Bing, and I started putting in why is Bing, and even Bing thinks, I want to search why is Bing my search engine and why is it so terrible? Like, Bing has a somewhat self-loathing point of view. But my point is, I don't have the time to go and check if Bing got good today. I don't have the time to go and reinterrogate my view of Bing. It is now locked in. That's my bias. It is rigid. It is one less thing I have to think about. So brand is just bias. It's not a thing that exists, but people are biased towards you, positively or negatively, towards your business, towards your category, positively or negatively. And there are 2 critical implications if you're with me so far. The first is that you are now in the experience business because It's experiences that build bias. Either experiences we have that stay with us, or experiences that we hear about from other people that we trust. That's how bias gets built. Not, I would argue, anymore through 30-second TV ads. Bias is built through experience. Therefore, you are in the experience business. And therefore, you need to think about really annoying, intangible things like, how do you want it to feel to do business with you? You know, sort of, you wake up and you're thinking about, well, what's our competitive landscape and who are our competitors and how do we outflank them and beat them on price or value or whatever? And then this guy's standing up and saying, yeah, but forget all that. You need to think about how you want them to feel. But this is actually really important. If you want people to trust you, if you want people to be biased towards you, you need to create that feeling, and that feeling needs to live in your experiences. So that's why things like design, whether it's graphic design, as we just talked about, or experience design, or whatever it may be, are so critical, because these things, these touch points, they create feelings, they create emotional responses. You need to think about, what stories do you want your clients and customers to tell about you? How cleanly will that experience you give them translate into a story that they will tell other people? Because that's the way that bias is going to be built, and bias is going to be contagious. The second implication is that we now need to understand that if we're in the experience business, we need to understand that the business of experiences is changing. And it's changing profoundly, and it's changing. And I'm not going to patronize you guys and give you a sort of 101 lecture on technology, but it's changing because we're inhabiting a fundamentally different world. I would argue there's two revolutions going on, and we don't need to talk too much about them other than to understand their implications. One is digital, one is social. And really we trace them back to these points. 2004, Zuckerberg invents Facebook. 2007, Steve Jobs places that social capability in our pockets with the iPhone, and away we go. Those two revolutions start spinning, and everything has changed. How we discover things, choose things, purchase things, how we recommend things, how we feed back, how we are caused to feel has been altered forever by digital and social media. And I want to come back to this device and think about the way that this is reshaping society, it's reshaping business, and it's even reshaping human behavior. On the one hand, I think we're now carrying this sort of Swiss Army knife of digital possibility. We can do pretty much anything from pretty much anywhere, as long as we've got Wi-Fi or a 4G signal, and we can do it within minutes. And this is changing us. This is creating an incredible demand, I think, for speed, for personalization, for utility. I think we're becoming unbelievably impatient and demanding as people. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm shopping online and for whatever reason I have to enter manually, just think of the inhumanity of this, the 16 numbers of my credit card, those are the longest 60 seconds of my life because I now expect it to be immediate and smart. But think about what that's then doing to every other interaction. We're so demanding. We want that sense of immediacy and precision and gratification. We don't, I think, tolerate inefficiencies in experiences that we're used to. But then on the other hand, that smartphone, that smart device we carry is something else as well. It's the best camera most of us have ever owned. It's our gateway to capturing almost every experience we have. It's our immediate ability to upload that to social platforms. And guess who's the #1 viewers of our own Instagram and Facebook feeds? It's ourselves. And we're effectively holding up a mirror. We're publishing a mirror in which we're looking at our own lives and going, how do I feel about this life that I'm living, these decisions that I'm making? And the way I'd kind of summarize it, we're sort of evolving into these kind of narcissistic cyborgs. On one hand, we really value efficiency and utility and getting things done and productivity. But on the other hand, we really value beauty and story and novelty and interestingness and uniqueness. We want it all. We want both sides of that. So we want convenience really rationally, and we want to be delighted emotionally. And I think there's some really important implications, and you can interpret this differently. I can see as you're sitting there, you're thinking, well, it's very different for a gin maker compared to someone who's working in real estate development. But I think the themes hold true. And I think we're in a new world of loyalty, bias, behavior. And I want to summarize it for you guys in a way that makes it sticky. So I'm going to go with sandwiches and peacocks. And I want you to think about these two paradigms of business. And we'll start with the sandwich. I'm British. I do my best to hide it, but it is there somewhere beneath the layers of inherited Australianness. And Britain is a sandwich nation. About 50% of all food sold at lunchtime in Britain is between two slices of bread of some description. The sandwich was invented effectively for a guy called the Earl of Sandwich. He was an avid card player. He didn't like to stop playing cards. He didn't like his cards getting greasy. So the staff would start putting the meat between two slices of bread. And then the people who play cards with him would say, oh, I'll have a sandwich as well. And the sandwich is born. And in a way, it's the original mobile device. You know, you can keep multitasking. You can play cards with one hand, sandwich with the other. And that was always when I grew up, you know, my first jobs in Britain. You knew that our friends on the continent would go for a 3-course lunch, but Britain kept working. We'd have a sandwich from Marks and Spencer's at our desk. And Marks and Spencer's, the British retailer, was sort of the first business to commercialize the sandwich. They saw the opportunity. They started putting really high-quality ingredients in, sandwich fridges in the front, and they hired a guy to be the head of sandwich innovation. And so this guy was working with farmers on genetically modifying tomatoes so they would leak less water so the sandwich wouldn't be soggy. And he was, you know, out doing what today we'd probably call customer-centric research, but then was just talking to customers. And he goes one day to the Marks and Spencer store in Manchester, Piccadilly. And across the road is Boots the chemist. And outside of Boots is a long line because Boots is a fast follower, good retailer. They've seen the sandwich boom. They started to put sandwich fridges in the front of their stores. You didn't have to navigate the whole shop. You could just go and grab a sandwich, go to the checkout. So he sees this long line and he marches over the street and he's like, why are these people queuing here? Like, our sandwiches are better. And one customer says something that really sticks with him. He says, I'm not crossing the road. And you think about that for a second. You're in the sandwich category. Therefore, by definition, you're in the convenience category. So even crossing the road is too much inconvenience. It's too much friction because by definition, your category is defined by convenience. I think this is something that Amazon get better than anyone else. When they say our vision is to be the most customer-centric business in the world, they get that notion that Amazon wins by removing friction, by removing inconvenience at all times. That's why they're opening stores with no lines and no checkouts and no staff. It's why they're inventing things like the Amazon Dash button, an internet-connected button where when you run out of toilet roll, push the button, automatically it just orders it online. You don't have to go to a shop, go to a website, do anything. Amazon are in the business of removing friction. That's the sandwich approach. And when you guys go back to your businesses tomorrow, think about sandwich strategies. In what ways could we remove pain, inconvenience, and friction for our customers? Because remember, if there's no pain or inconvenience or friction for doing business with you, by definition, there's pain and inconvenience involved in moving away from you. Again, that's what Amazon gets. That's what Netflix gets. Every time they recommend the next TV show you should watch, frictionlessly, they just get you into the next show. They don't want you to have to navigate other things. But that is 50%, I think, of the world we're in. The other side is the peacock. Now, the peacock is a fundamentally ridiculous bird. It's sort of inefficiently designed with this ridiculous tail feather display, but there's a reason for it. Peacocks traditionally live in environments with high grasses, so the male peacocks who get the girl are the ones with the highest tail feather displays. They're the ones that simply get noticed. They have a prominence, they have a distinctiveness, and I think in this noisy world, peacocks do really well. I think Aesop, great Melbourne brand, now global, is a wonderful example of this. They do the basics brilliantly. Their science, their research and development, the quality of their product is second to none, but they don't stop there. They then say, we believe unequivocally that well-considered design improves lives. Every single Aesop store in the world is different. Think about the inefficiency of that. If you're the CFO of Aesop, and Aesop come to you and the creative director says, we're about to open a store in Sao Paulo in Brazil and another in Suwon in South Korea, and we've got two completely different interior design teams and architecture teams, you'd say, you're mad. This is unbelievably inefficient. They're both broadly the same floor plate with broadly the same stock. What are you doing? But that's part of what makes Aesop special. They recognize that they show the world they care about aesthetics, not just through packaging, but through experiences. They're truly a wonderful peacock of a brand. It's not rational, but it is really, really powerful. And I think when you bring the two together, you get to something like Disney. All the irrational magic of Disneyland and all the characters and the rides and the stories combined with you're there, you're navigating Disneyland, trying to get past the lines. You've got two kids who should have eaten something healthy 3 hours ago and are now on a complete sugar high and they're about to crash. And you've got the My Magic Plus wristband, which means as you walk into the restaurant, The restaurant registers you've arrived and orders the food that you pre-ordered online the night before, and as your bums hit the seats, your food hits the table. That's peacock thinking and it's sandwich thinking all mashed together. And that, for me, is where you get to a really powerful place in this experience world that we now all inhabit. And the last thing I want you to reflect on in this is what standard those experiences need to be to move the needle, to build that brand that's truly distinctive, that brand that truly commands bias and loyalty. And I would argue the experiences need to shock you. Whether it's a sandwich strategy of driving greater convenience, removing friction, making it so easy to do business with you, or whether it's a peacock strategy of doing stuff that's beautiful and designful and considered and rich with story, you've got to feel a little bit shocked about how good it is. If it's just kind of okay, it's not going to move the needle for anyone. Which again goes to that notion of focus. What can we do to that standard that no one else could? So I want you to go away today and think about what could we do to a shocking standard that's truly useful to our customers, or that our customers just find a little bit awesome in some way. And I think with that, you can start to think about what are the decisions we need to make? What are the areas of focus that we need to apply to maximize our return? And what I want to leave you with before we sort of use the gin as a little bit of a model for this in action is a quick construct to help you think that through. And it's a construct about how to think, not how to do, because I can't tell you how to do your business. I've got almost no idea what you guys do. But I can give you some thoughts on thinking. As I said, purpose, craft, experience, and community are the four that I want to leave you with. This purpose conversation I think is really critical. There's a very deep argument going on in the world of marketing and advertising and brand right now around purpose, and you can go and read up on blogs like Mumbrella if you really want to, but a lot of people are saying, well, every brand now needs a cause. You need to stand for something in the world, and there's wonderful brands like Tom's Shoes, where every pair of shoes you buy from Tom's, send a pair to the developing world. And that's fantastic, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is clarity on this question. Why do you exist? Why do you need to exist? Because you might say, well, Matt, we exist to make profit. And that's okay, well, that's an outcome. But that's not why you need to exist. The world doesn't need you to make a profit, you do. Why do you need to exist? Why do people value you, truly? What is the role you play in their world and in their lives that they value? And the critical and really prickly one I'd love you to wrestle with at some stage is if you enter a little parallel universe, you join a different strand of the multiverse, and in that one, you send out the press release to say, we've gone out of business. We're going fishing. Why would they mourn you? Why would they find something about your business irreplaceable? It's incredibly challenging because most of us, most of the time, are not running mournable businesses. We've got to be honest about that. But what could you do to get to that place of close to irreplaceability? And when you start to think about a why we exist, a purposeful answer that feels irreplaceable, I think you're in interesting territory. This is a cliche, I always apologize for it, but it's such a well-fitting one, I feel the need to share it. You look at Blockbuster. This is a business that could have bought Netflix, but it was so focused on its product delivery that it thought Netflix doesn't fit because we run a bricks and mortar video store business and we make as much money on late fees and selling soda and selling secondhand VHS tapes as we do from rental. Why would we want to go into a digital business that only had one revenue stream? But of course, the reality is if you look at it through the lens of purpose, Blockbuster and Netflix did the same thing. They gave people temporary access to content that they wanted to consume but not own in a convenient way and for a reasonable price. And when you start to think about that purposeful lens, it helps you more quickly navigate the changes in the world. So you look then at the speed with which Netflix went from mailing DVDs to streaming digital content to making their own original content because they recognize they're really in the business of understanding viewer behavior, being able to predict what you would click on next, being able to predict what you would watch more of if only more of it existed. So they've, at incredible speed, followed that purpose through several iterations of innovation, while there was Blockbuster that couldn't even see that one natural jump because they were so focused on product as a paradigm rather than thinking about their purpose. The second is craft, this source of expertise. Picking on Blockbuster because it's fun. We've come from a world where you didn't even have to be good enough to succeed. Blockbuster was a real estate play. You have your video stores in the right places, you're kind of guaranteed to be all right. And then you could punish your customers. You could punish them for returning the tape late. You could punish them for not rewinding the tape. You could punish them for driving 20 minutes and then turning up and the one movie they wanted was out of stock. You didn't have to serve your customer. You could punish them. And now that has flipped so much that now even good enough, I don't think is good enough. We've got to be at a shocking standard. We've got to ask ourselves honestly, if you've had that workshop and you've picked that sense of craft, you've picked that sense of expertise, you've got to have that honesty session. Is this going to make us famous? Like, we have all just agreed around this table that this could be our thing, but is anyone going to talk about this? Is anyone going to recommend us on the back of this? If we plug this into the heart of the hero experience we want to create for our customers, is it going to be talk-worthy? Is it going to have that contagious quality? That's what I mean by really focusing on your craft. The critical thing then, once you've got that sense of purpose, you've got that craft, I believe, is to plug that into experiences. Experiences that make the shocking stuff about you tangible, hard to avoid. I'm very fortunate I get to consult to the guys in the Google marketing team in the States, and probably the biggest thing they've been working on for the last few years is the Google Assistant. I'm sure a few people in this room have now got a little Google Home device, and occasionally you'll say, "Okay, Google," or maybe you've got an Amazon Echo and you're calling out songs and Google searches to Alexa. But Google's challenge has been, how do you make the value of the assistant truly tangible to people? How do you make them experience it? So at CES this year, we actually built a whole Disneyland-style theme park ride where people went on a 5-minute journey to experience effectively a day powered by the assistant, because what they realized is they could make all the 30-second ads and all the videos in the world, but they needed people to have a physical experience. And critically, the people at CES, they're not consumers. They're all the partners that they need to come on board with that ecosystem to create true consumer power. So that's even the most engaged of the tech industry. They recognize the need to give people an experience, to truly dimensionalize that value, not just talk about it. And I think all of that then adds up to the ability to build community, to build closer relationships with your customers, by committing to your craft, by really standing for something, and then with that shocking quality, whether it's the utility, the usefulness you want to create, whether it's the awesome experiences you want to create, allowing people to get up close and personal with it, allowing them to experience it, and being worthy of them doing the advertising for you, doing the promotion for you, doing the advocating for you. And the last little point I want to make here, and I think social media represents a really interesting temptation to blast our stories across the social airwaves, much as we might once have done through radio advertising or TV advertising or newspaper advertising. But it actually, I think, asks us to ask this question of how many customers do we really need? Have we actually figured out the mathematics of how many truly engaged, truly loyal customers do we really need? And how could we quite forensically target them with great experiences? And certainly something, as I move into the gin land, that we've really valued has been that quality over quantity, has been that chasing down of small groups of people that we feel we can build incredibly powerful bonds with, rather than just sort of spraying out our story to the masses and probably missing most of them and not really building any kind of binding relationship with any of them. So that's a model. That's a way of thinking about the world very quickly. It's a way of thinking about the importance of purpose and craft and experience and community. And what I'd love to do, if you'll indulge me for probably 20 minutes, is show you how that way of thinking has helped us to shape 5 years and 2 months of a little gin business. I put this slide up not because it's particularly relevant, but it makes me happy. Gin Foundry in the UK called 4 Pillars the perfect example of modern gin. We'll talk business first. 5 years and 2 months old. We've doubled in size year on year, 3 years in a row now. We've been voted the best on-premise spirit in Australia 2 years in a row, ahead of all the big boys. We're now in 25 markets worldwide. We're the number one selling Australian craft spirit, and we are the number 2 super premium gin in Australia, trying to chase down Hendrick's, but they would be the number 1 in that category in every market worldwide. There is no rocket science. There's a little bit of distilling science. There's no rocket science in 4 Pillars. There's a little bit of strategy and a lot of simple, disciplined execution. And absolutely, these 4 things have been at the heart of it. And purpose is at the core. 2 things that we defined very early. We actually launched 4 Pillars through crowdfunding. We launched it through a little platform called Possible, which is a way to sell stuff before you've made it. And so we needed a couple of things to build that crowdfunding platform. The first thing, we needed a name. Stuart came up with the name 4 Pillars. He had this sort of loose notion that good drinks was sort of built on about 4 ingredients. Most good things in life were sort of 4 simple things done well. And we said, that works. Looks quite nice on the label. The name's not too wide. The designer was happy. There was nice tallness in the letters. And there's sort of no such thing as a good name. There's definitely bad names. There's no, you make a name good. And really the main thing that 4 Pillars gave us was a rhythm of storytelling. So we started to go, you know what, every gin we make, it's probably going to be built on 4 pillars. And this was the rare dry. We said it's just great botanicals, great Yarra Valley water, the best stills in the world made by Christian Karl of Germany, and lots of love and care and attention. They'll do. It's a way of telling stories, nothing much more than that. The critical thing, and this is the one really, really dense slide that I just want to linger on because I find it important, and I'd love you to see the importance as well. The critical thing that we got to focus on at that time, though, was our sense of purpose. And I'm always really grateful. Stuart and Cameron, when we made the decision to make gin, they decided they needed to go on what they called a fact-finding mission, which involved a convertible BMW 6 Series and a road trip from Seattle down to Los Angeles. And they stopped at about 35 different distilleries. I mean, the American craft distilling scene is 10 years ahead of ours. And every time they tasted a great gin, they're like, this has got to be made in the Karl still. And they go out back, and sure enough, a beautiful copper still made by Karl of Germany was there. So they came back and they said, we've got to have a Karl still. Bad news is they're expensive and there's a year-long waiting list. And that became this huge blessing in disguise because it forced us to slow down, and it allowed me that time to go, well, I want to interrogate why we're doing this. And instead of them going, just get on with it, it's making gin, it sort of had that time. And this is what we came to. The first was, gin is the most diversely possibility-rich spirit out there because there's only one rule. There has to be juniper in it. After that, gin can be anything. You can distill anything to make gin, which means gin can taste more of one place than any other spirit. And if you happen to be in the place in the world that tastes best, which I believe is modern Australia, I think the quality of produce, indigenous botanicals, food cultures, this is the best tasting place on earth. So we should be able to make the best gin on earth, and for very long and boring reasons connected with our tax and excise system, it was a place where the gin distilling boom had not taken off. But if we could do it, if we could elevate the craft of distilling in Australia, we'd be making some of the best gin in the world. So that was the main thing. The second was we saw that people were drinking differently. They wanted to drink better, not more. They wanted to drink better at home. They were going back to classic cocktails. There was a rise of the serious bartender, not the Brian Brown 1990s shaky bartender, but the serious bartender, the craftsman, was coming back. And we said, well, if we could celebrate that craft of the cocktail, we'd be part of a movement. The third is that we saw that the modern Australia that we all inhabit, the creative, diverse, urban Australia of Melbourne's laneways and Sydney's eastern suburbs, that was not the Australia that people saw overseas. And there are outliers and wonderful brands projecting that modern Australia. But if we could be part of sharing that modern Australian story and attitude, we'd go really well. And if we could do all that while supporting the community our craft depends on, again, thumbs up. That is not a story we tell our customers all the time. But it's absolutely something that anchors and directs decisions that we make. And critically, it's at the heart of our commitment to our craft. Because ultimately, we are makers first and foremost. And this is where we make. This is the 4 Pillars Distillery. It's in Healesville, out in the Yarra Valley. It's a big old timber shed. For the first 2 years, we were squatting in the back of a winery, and we had the opportunity to buy a pretty beautiful, but it hid its beauty very well, but a pretty beautiful building. And so we moved in there. And these are our stills. That's Wilma on the right. That's Jude, her big sister, on the left. Now, they've both got a quadruply big sister, Beth, and then my mum, Eileen, doesn't drink, so she got the little laboratory still, the sort of academic still. So between them, the 3 founders' mums and the mum of employee number 1 have given their names to the 4 copper stills. And that's Cameron there, and he's distilling every day across all 3 production stills. Behind, you can see an array of barrels. It doesn't look anything like that now. We've got about 10 times as many barrels and no room. But every day, we are making gin in the space. And when we began, Cameron started to play with a canvas of botanicals and the standard stuff you use. It's sort of juniper and cardamom and coriander seed and cinnamon or cassia bark. He starts to play with beautiful Australian natives like Tasmanian pepperberry leaf, native lemon myrtle, the most citrusy, lemony substance on the planet. It's extraordinary. But then the big game changer for us was fresh citrus. If you're making gin in the Northern Hemisphere, you could not rely on fresh citrus all year round. You'd make gin for 2 months of the year. So they all use peel. Whereas we had the opportunity to steam whole fresh citrus. So in our original gin, it was whole fresh oranges, around about 5 kilograms of biodynamic oranges in every batch, just sliced in half and steamed. And that led to this gin, Rare Dry Gin. It was our sort of original gin baby. It's still our favorite gin. We launched it in December 2013. In March 2014, it won a double gold medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. That meant that every judge in the competition had given it a gold. And we were shocked. I mean, we were blown away that this gin that didn't taste like a London-style gin, it wasn't a juniper bomb, it didn't taste a bit like Pinot Clean, like it had this big, modern Australian, spicy, meets citrusy thing going on. Amazed it had been so well acclaimed. It's done that twice since, in 2016 and 2017. It's really now one of the most awarded gins in the world. And so that immediately gave us this anchor and this signature gin, and we garnish it with fresh orange because of the use of whole oranges in there. And a huge percentage, I'd say 70, 80% of my marketing mission is to make sure that every good bar in the world has a bottle of that and is serving their G&Ts with orange. It's a real single-mindedness to how we promote that. And all around every major Australian city this summer, we're running street posters just promoting the importance of the orange. Hendrix have got the cucumber, we've got the orange. And I just want to pause there for a second and just think about our purpose. Number one, elevate the craft of distilling gin. But then here's me talking like a marketer saying, I just need to get everyone putting an orange in their G&T. And that's a real tension point at the heart of the brand. And I think if we hadn't had that purpose, we'd have said, we're done. We've got one great gin. It's got lots of gold medals, double gold medals, doubly better. Now let's get on with sales and marketing. But that would not have been living our purpose. And so very quickly, after making that first gin, we started to make our second gin. We started to make a Navy strength gin. A Navy strength gin has to be over 57%. Because at 57%, the British Navy could test it by pouring it on their gunpowder, and the gunpowder would still light. So the gin was proofed. So we started to make Rare Dry Gin, but at a higher proof for the Gin Palace in Melbourne. Because like all bartenders, they said, we like your gin, could be stronger. So we did that, and they loved it. Cameron did not love it. Because he said, well, at that higher proof, that orange flavor, it's just being flattened out, it's being held in. So he went and tracked down these things, native finger limes from the bar in Hinterland, the size of your little finger, cut them in half. They're full of these little limey caviar beads of bright citrus, really punch their weight against that higher alcohol level. He put fresh ginger in, fresh turmeric, and sort of almost took that Rare Dry Gin to Southeast Asia, created this really distinctive flavor profile. 4 years in a row, the world's best Navy strength gin at the Global Gin Masters in London. It's an absolute bomb of a gin. It's incredible. At the same time, he starts putting some of that Rare Dry Gin in old Chardonnay barrels, create our first barrel-aged gin. He gets hold of some old sherry casks, and Australian Apera cask, because we're not allowed to call it sherry anymore. And we start to make this beautiful pair of barrel-aged gins. At the same time, again, some Shiraz grapes go past the original distillery where we were sharing with a winery, and no one seemed to know what to do with them, so the next day the problem was solved. Cameron had disappeared them. And what he'd done is he'd poured gin over the top of them and then stirred that every day. Because we'd always thought we'd make slow gin, very British product using these sort of plummy little sloe berries and very quite delicious but quite sickly, and we didn't love it. And so Cameron had this idea, well, could Australia's answer be to use Shiraz grapes? And so Bloody Shiraz Gin was born. And so we're starting now with this gin innovation. We're 10 years behind Hendrix, but we're already making 4 times as many gins as Hendrix are. We're starting to live that purpose. We then make our first social media gin. We meet these guys on Facebook, Seienee in Madrid, and we thought 2 things. 1, their still Vera looks a lot like Wilma. 2, Cameron wanted to write off a holiday to Spain on tax. So he took a bunch of botanicals over, and we made a 50-50 gin, 50% Spanish, 50% Australian. We invited them over the following year. We made the return gin, called it Cousin Vera's Gin. It was this beautiful Spanish savory gin. So that family of gins is growing. This year we invited, or last year now, John Hillgren from Hernö in Sweden to come over, make a gin. We called it Dry Island Gin. This collaborative spirit, this creative spirit starts to then make us feel like maybe we're living that purpose of elevating our craft. And that's fueled this ever-growing family of different gins, and that family photo is now very out of date. And it doesn't stop there, and this is what I mean when I talk about committing to that craft to differentiate us. It's about how much deeper can you go, because one of the things that we started to look at was all these oranges we've got. they've done their job in making the gin, and then Cameron was taking them home and he was making orange cakes with them, but that's not a scalable business model. And so we found a preservist and we made an orange marmalade with gin steamed oranges. We added a dash of Campari to every second batch and made a breakfast Negroni. We've gone on to win World Marmalade Awards and a Wallpaper Design Award for those. We take the water, the stillage from the distillation process, and we give it to a cheesemaker and make a gin moonshine cheese. So when people want a snack at the distillery, they're consuming a byproduct of the distilling. We take the spent botanicals, effectively all these tea leaves left at the bottom of the still, and true story, a pig farmer walks into a gin distillery, get that the right way around, and he's like, what would you do with these botanicals? And we said, well, we sell them for compost, gold coin donation for the CFA. He said, well, my pigs would eat them. And this guy breeds the most beautiful pure breed Berkshire pigs. They now dine out on a grain feed enhanced with gin botanicals. They have one bad day, and we have gin pig dinners. And these are now these unbelievable celebrations of the Yarra Valley, of our gin, of our friends who make wine, of these beautiful pigs. We work with great chefs. And in fact, we're hosting a gin pig dinner in this very restaurant later on this year. And so with this commitment to these byproducts, the most recent was taking our spent botanicals and giving it to the guys at Hunted and Gathered, who hand make beautiful chocolate bars and making a gin chocolate. This isn't chocolate inspired by the gin. It's not chocolate designed to taste like the gin. It is made from the stuff that made the gin. It's a recycling of product. It's a sustaining of flavor. And at this point, you start to go, okay, hand on heart, I think we're doing something in the craft of distilling gin that no one else is. And now my job is much easier, because now I just have to bring people close to this. There's enough that we're doing that makes us distinctive. So I just need to get people here. I need to invite people to come and drink and taste gin in the bar, looking through those 4 windows to where we're making. I need them to sample our gin. So back to a little bit of sandwich thinking. A lot of people in the Yarra Valley are driving. They can have one drink. If they can only have one G&T, they're not experiencing the 4 pillars experience. They're having to choose. So it's not rocket science, but it works. The mini G&T paddle, 3 1/3 serves of a gin and tonic, their own bottle of tonic. They get to taste 3 gins. They see the recommended garnishes. They then get to finish their drinks. Within that one drink they've allowed themselves, we've given them product education. We've shown them the range. We've exposed them to what we're doing. It's not rocket science, but it's a critical little piece of problem-solving thinking. Next time, we want them the other side of that wall. We want them in a maker session. I talked about quality over quantity. Every month, we invite 12 people to come and make gin with us. I think in the pre-social media world, you guys would have legitimately said to me, Matt, that is not a strategy that you can grow a global brand on. What is the point of those 12 people? I think in the social media world, the quality of engagement, the fact that people are looking through the window that is social media going, I want to be there. I want to make my own gin. I want to have that experience. It's a very different world we inhabit. So we really believe in those up close and personal sessions. And when it's not with consumers, it's with bartenders. That was the group of Rockpool bartenders. They made modern Australian gin with us, which is now served in every Rockpool and every Qantas first class lounge around the world. It's bartenders who've helped to fuel even more product development. We made the world's first dedicated Negroni gin. This year is the 100th anniversary of the magnificent Negroni, so we're going to be going very big on that this year. And so we've got this whole other series of gins made with, by, and for bartenders. 2 years ago, we invited our first chef to come and make with us, Chef Moon from Kisume, the great Japanese restaurant in Flinders Lane next to Chin Chin. He came and made a gin that we infused with sake, pure Kisume gin, designed to be chilled in the freezer and sipped with sushi. Just late last year, we released a gin in honor of the new amazing Espy across the road here in St Kilda, called Sticky Carpet Gin, in tribute to the beer-soaked carpets of the old Esky. And we used beer hops in there. We freshened it up with some beer, and it was just a truly pub gin. And you know, a single venue, again, total indulgence, making gin for one venue, but the relationship that's cemented, the stories that's fueled has been fantastic. But of course, this is only as good as the number of bartenders we can get to us, and if we can't solve the problem of getting bartenders to us and drunk bartenders home, we're going to be stuck, which is why we bought a gin bus. Again, not rocket science, but sandwich thinking. It solves that problem. And because we can't get every bartender to us, and because the 3 founders are 3 very uncool, bald, middle-aged white guys, we started to hire tame bartenders. This is James Irvine, probably the most creative bartender in Australia, Australia's representative at Bacardi Legacy, runner-up in the world's top bartender competition last year. He's now our tame bartender, inventing the gin drinks that go with the gins, because if we're shifting the craft of distilling gin, we need to take responsibility for making different drinks with them. So that's what James does, pushing out into the world, anchoring experiences from pop-up Negroni stores to red snapper brunches to gin pig dinners. And that now is, this is a real-time conversation now. That's my next big push. How do I not just bring people to the distillery, but take fragments of that experience out to them, whether it's the pop-up store we ran in Maya, Melbourne this year, or whether it's the work we did, for example, with the Glen Shopping Mall late last year. They wanted to relaunch their fashion floor, so they came to us and said, can we put a pop-up Four Pillars gin bar in there, because we know that we can pull in a different type of customer with that. So that's my next challenge, getting the brand out into the world more and using that to build community and to make sure that all of these stories, whether it's from a gin or a made from gin byproduct or an experience, can get out into the world to the right people. It starts with this. This is the landing page of our website. There's no sound on it. It's just vision. And what I want you to notice here is you're not seeing bottles of gin. You're seeing making, because I want people to see us at first impression as a maker business. I want them to recognize that's what drives us. We're makers. That's why we have over-invested in photography. I had to fight quite a battle in the early days with my partners to really see the value of content. Because, again, it's not something you can measure. It's intangible, but we have a visually differentiated manufacturing process. Our stills are beautiful. Our botanicals are beautiful. The drinks we can make are beautiful. Let's leverage that opportunity to maximum effect. And so when we then build campaigns, when we drive into social media, and we now put a fair amount of money behind social media, it's not based on invented stuff. It's based on curated stuff. Hope that doesn't seem like wordplay. I think it's really important that there's enough value in the brand that we just have to curate the story. We don't have to invent something. It's not make-believe. It's not some silly myth about my grandfather was an Air Force pilot and crash-landed in a forest and discovered a secret gin recipe. It's just being straight with people, but curating it beautifully and say, well, this is our Shiraz gin. This is what it looks like to drink. This is behind the scenes of making it. Here's the Facebook post that launched it last year with the Blaze Shiraz bottles going down the bottling line and getting filled up, and it's quite mesmeric. It's just storytelling based on truth. Here are the beautiful cocktails you can make with it. Here's a bit of sandwich thinking. We know you've never bought a Shiraz gin before, so here's a beautiful cocktail book that goes with it to tell you how to make great drinks, because my gin sucks if your drink sucks. So if you go home and you go, I've got no idea how to drink this gear, you'll go back to Tanqueray very, very quickly. So the biggest marketing spend we do is a free cocktail book with every single bottle of gin that we sell direct. And last story, and one that I think just encapsulates everything that we've talked about, is Christmas gin. And it's totally the wrong time of year to talk about Christmas gin, except for me, because I'm already working on this year's one. But Cameron here is our distiller, and he was one of 5 boys. And every year on Derby Day, his mum would make Christmas puddings while the boys would watch the races. And he thought this is a pretty good tradition. He's got 3 girls. He's like, okay, I'm going to get the girls to do the same thing. And he's doing this one year, I think it was 2015. He's looking at the recipe. He's going, everything in this recipe would distill. So he makes the puddings, he distills the puddings, and he got hold of these 2 old musket barrels. We call them Statler and Waldorf. They're 100-year-old barrels. They originally were William Grant's whiskey barrels. 85 years ago, they came to Australia. They'd been full of musket for 80 years. It took a month of them being upside down for the treacly musket to empty out of them. So they filled them with this fresh, distilled Christmas pudding gin, and the result was pretty spectacular. So we decided to go a little bit bigger on this idea of Christmas gin. So last year, we made them together. We got all the kids together to make them. We photographed the whole thing. This was the 1977 Woman's Weekly Christmas recipe guide that Cameron's mum always used to use to make the puddings. He's still got that. These are all the kids getting together, making the puddings. This is Cameron then distilling the puddings. And then because this is sort of a gift to ourselves every Christmas, we went, well, we probably shouldn't wrap it in a branded label. Let's put a piece of art on it. So every year we engage a different artist to interpret the idea of Australian Christmas, to tell the world that Christmas looks like that. It's sunny and hot and by the pool. It's not like cliched, cinematic Northern Hemisphere Christmas. So this year, we've got Stephen Baker, a beautiful Melbourne artist, to create this scene called Basking in the Sun. We photographed Stephen with the artwork. We told his story. We captured the beautiful little gin soldiers going down the bottling line. We shot those bottles to look like the label. There were the bottles and glasses of gin basking in the sun. We went and set up a pool scene that felt similar and created content there. We got James Irvine to invent amazing Christmassy cocktails like a Christmas gin punch. because we'd made gin with the puddings. We then made Christmas puddings with the gin, and that became another seasonal byproduct. And hopefully you can see with all of this, when we go to market to tell our stories and to try and then build a content marketing platform for 6 weeks, again, there's nothing that needs to be invented. The richness is all there in the quality and the interestingness of the craft and what we're doing. And there's the website all taken over with Christmas storytelling. And then to sort of complete the cycle, that's my daughter Harper this year, using this year's Christmas gin to make the puddings that have already now gone into barrel that will be the basis for next year's Christmas gin. And so that cycle continues. And as soon as we're out of Christmas gin, we were back into talking about summer and gin and tonic. And remember, back at the start of me talking about gin, reminding people to put an orange in that gin and tonic and trying to do things to keep that really alive. So that's our little gin story. Hopefully you can see really anchored in a sense of purpose, particularly around elevating the craft of distilling gin and really celebrating the craft of the cocktail. Really built on a deep focus on the craft of distilling and making things from that gin, packaging that into experiences that people can have and can talk about, and using that to anchor a social community. That's 4 pillars. That's me. Very happy to take any questions, but thank you so much for having me.